Hey, what's up, guys? This is part 2 of the Cyberface conversion tutorial into 2K18. And what you're looking at now is where we stopped at the end of part 1, where we had converted the player and applied the hair textures, but we found that the hair color was off. And I said at the end that I would show you how I recolor it. So here's that. Alright, so starting out in Photoshop, here's the gist of what I typically do to recolor the hair. I might keep it short just for the sake of time, but I thought it might be helpful for you guys to see my workflow, even though there's not one specific way to adjust colors, especially in an application like Photoshop or Paint.net. Um, but I thought it would be helpful nonetheless. So basically what I do is, after sampling some uh, of the color from the original image, I will then make a few adjustment layers. And so I'll have um, 3 adjustment layers with 3 different blending modes, um, all sharing the same solid color, which is the color that I will have when I'm done tweaking these values. And I don't use these layers at full opacity. Um, I get them to a point where the effect is evident but not overpowering. And for my adjustment layers, I will do from top to bottom hue, color, luminosity. And each of these blending modes will um, bring the original image, um, the color properties and values, it will bring them towards the color I've selected and um, that the solid color is for the adjustment layer, and to whatever degree I decide as far as the opacity. Um, and each of these you definitely don't want to go overboard with it, um, especially with color and hue, because if you do, it will have like a monochrome effect. You don't want that. And so this is about where I like it, and I'm going to export that and use that in the game. But real quick, I'm going to hop into Paint.net and just show a couple things that I've noticed are similar between the applications, and I'm just going to try to emulate um, what I do in Photoshop to some degree. Even though I'm not a experienced user of Paint.net, I know that not everybody has Photoshop, and since Paint.net's free, I felt like it'd be good to show you guys on that too. So as you can see, a lot of the abilities to adjust the color are shared between the apps, with adjustment layers, creating multiple layers. Um, you can use the paint bucket like the solid color. And then as you see, there's blending modes. Although they're different and I don't know exactly what all of them do, there are blending modes. And so now what you're seeing is the edited texture from my Photoshop file. And so now moving on to the main topic of the video, which is making 3D edits in Blender and adapting the converted player into 2K18. And I will import the model for the player I'm converting. I will import it from his original like default 2K17 files, not from the converted folder that we set up. And this is solely just for the purpose of having access to the model skeleton, which you see I imported, and then I made the object player its parent layer or parent object. So it's hidden now and out of the way, and it's just there so that it's present in some capacity to have more access to vertex groups. For whatever reason, the skeleton doesn't import when the file is presented as a 2K18 file. So we can, just as before, we can just export this as if it were the 2K17 model and with that name, and then just drag it into the 7-zip archive and change the name real quick. And so all I'm doing here is, it's not completely necessary, but making the reference model transparent and adding a material to it just to where it's see-through and tinted a little bit of different color. It just makes it easier to refer to, and so that you don't have to be in wireframe mode to try and line the converted player up to it. And so you're going to want to be in side view mode by pressing 3, and then you're going to want to be in orthographic view by pressing 5, and then you're going to want to toggle on proportional editing by pressing O. And then what I'm doing here is showing a little bit the effects of proportional editing. As you saw before, with a small radius, it will have a really sharp fall off, and then with a larger radius, it will have a smoother and less noticeable fall off, but it will also move more parts of the body. So I try to get something to where it smooths it out some, but it's not like taking the entire like neck, chest, and everything with it when I move it. And I have everything selected, as you can see. Everything selected from what you see on the outside and what's inside the head. So the eyes and the mouth, bag thing, and the teeth. So I am lining up some feature. What I usually do is line up some feature of my 2K17 model and refer to that and try to angle it the same way as to get the head tilted as close to, how it should be as I can. So that's what I do first. And then once you have the head tilted a little bit and move more towards that position of the 2K18 model, the focus then turns to the eyes, which is the main reason we're doing this tilt and all that, is because the eyes, for whatever reason, when you convert a player, are affected the most, and they can just be off in general. So I line it up to the eyes, and then now what I do is switch. I switch to the reference model, and I will be going into edit mode and hiding everything but the eyeballs. And if you're wondering why I'm going to be editing the layer of the 2K18 model, the only reason I'm doing this is I'm going to move the position of the 2K18 model's eyes around to basically just update the values to where the converted player's eyes are. Because with like the scene file, and since we're using the highhead.scene file, the values are different. And so I think there's just some confusion with the eye animations or whatever as to where the position of the eyes is. And so just for the sake of knowing how much to change each value for the left and right eyeball in a highhead.scene file, we're going to be moving these the eyes around from the 2K18 model. So it's not about like physical change in Blender. It's just to help in adjusting the values. And as you can see, is when you're in edit mode, what you can do is you can press G, which is what you press to move a selection, and then press Z or Y or whatever, one of the axes that you're going to be moving along, and then without even moving or changing any values, just press enter, and on the left you'll see a kind of like a dialog box that shows up. It says it's labeled translate, and it'll have the values for how much you move the X, Y, and Z. And so you can basically just change all these values at once, as opposed to pressing G, moving it along the Y, and then pressing G again and moving along the X or something, because then you just see the new change you made. But this does it all in one movement. And it's a little more intuitive and helpful as far as changing these values. So now I just pull up, make sure I just have the left and right eyeball that I'm in that area of the scene file and editing those values, and just update right now the Y and Z values according to the movements I made. And in this dialog box, and seeing all those values just makes it really easy to refer to where you can just click on your click on Notepad, and while seeing Blender in the background and the dialog box, you can just check back and forth and as you're making the changes. And although we're not done yet changing the values, you just want to press save and then go back into Blender. And now we're going to move to individual eyes, because we're going to be adjusting their X position, which requires them to be moved separately. And we're doing the same thing though. Pressing G, then X, and enter without doing anything, and then going and clicking on the arrow to change those values incrementally into where we see how much we're tweaking it. And basically the goal is to get the eyes of the 2K18 model into as close as you can to the exact position of the 2K17 model, so that you can update the values, the XYZ values for the scene file as accurately as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you can be you can spend as much time on it as you want, and that may determine, or that will actually determine the result. So if you are one of the people that really wants it to look right, and if you see a close-up in the game on a replay, you don't want to see anything funky going on, then you'll probably want to try and be a little more patient and take your time and do this. But you can be more approximate with it if you don't mind that much. You just want them to be passable, and you want to just them to look normal in like broadcast view or something when you're playing. And the only thing that's kind of tricky about the X values is, think of the X values in the scene file in terms of how far they are from zero, or how far they are from the center, the origin. And it's kind of weird, like the signs don't necessarily make sense, but just think of that. So if you're moving it closer to the middle or to the origin, you're going to be also bringing that scene value closer to zero. And then if you're moving it farther away, more to the outside, you're going to be doing that same thing in the scene file. So if it's negative, you're going to be subtracting from that value to make it further from zero. Or if the value in the scene file is positive, doing the exact opposite and adding to that value to make it further from zero. That's how I think of it, at least. So now that the eyes are adjusted, we now want to first just do a couple things to get it ready to shrink wrap to the 2K18 model, and then we will go ahead and shrink wrap it. And so the two things that you want to do before you start shrink wrapping is you're going to make a custom selection, and as you see, select blend head shape, and then you're going to deselect part of that by deselecting the head custom J and T or whatever you saw it on the screen, and basically just assign them to a new vertex group, a temporary vertex group that you added. And this just, along with the other vertex groups that are included with the skeleton, this helps speed up the shrink wrap process. And you'll see in a second how. And then secondly, before I shrink wrap, I will make sure the 2K18 model is visible, and then go on to wireframe mode, and basically just around the trap's neck, shoulder area, just make sure that the 2K17 model is somewhat enclosed in that model. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered or anything, but that it's inside the 2K18 model, because for whatever reason it shrink wraps better and cleaner when that's done. And we're going to be shrink wrapping to it anyway, so it's not going to make a difference making those areas smaller beforehand. And so the first ones that vertex groups that you're going to be selecting here to be shrink wrapped are what you would usually have. I believe it's arms, base body shape, hidden shader or whatever, and then legs. So those main four. And then you're going to have 3 additional vertex groups. And you can see those here. The temporary, and then just type in those other 2 in the search box of the vertex groups. So def_spine2 and then neck_twist 50, something like that. And as you have noticed, I have repeated or copied these boxes for shrink wrapping, and to the point where it looks probably excessive, because with these vertex groups, it does it more it does it more incrementally, the shrink wrapping, and I did it additional times to try and shrink wrap it incrementally as close as I can to the 2K18 model. And then I'm going to apply all. And so I click copy on the spine 2 like 25 to 30 times, and then I did the same with the neck twist thing about 5 times. And so now, after exporting the changes we made, I'm going to go ahead and do what I said earlier, which is drag the 2K17 labeled file, or the file that is still named like it's 2K17, drag that in, and do what we did in part 1, which is drag it over, and then click on the previous model file, copy the name for that, delete that, and then rename the model that you have just exported and dragged in. And so as you can see, first things first, you can see that the eyes don't look right. They're not angled right. And you can see, with the exception of the back and the shoulder area, the clipping has pretty much been eliminated, but we're going to have to go in and tweak that a little bit. And if you look close enough, you can also see that the upper arm has a little bit of clipping too. And this is pretty typical. Usually shrink wrapping it helps to avoid clipping. With everything else almost perfectly, and then the upper arm sometimes you have to make adjustments to, for whatever reason, that there's more clipping with the upper arm that needs to be taken care of usually. And so first I'm just going to make some edits to the eyes and try to get them to where they are looking normal and they're not like looking into the top of their eyelid. And so I'm just going to rotate them. According to the view you're looking at now, I'm going to rotate them clockwise. So rotating them down. And usually when you do this, you end up like having to be more pronounced with the rotation and everything than you would expect. It might seem like you're or feel like you're overdoing it, but typically you have to be kind of dramatic with the rotation for it to really show up in game. But obviously, if you take it too far, they're just going to be looking at the bottom of their eyelids, not the top. And I've condensed this a little bit, these adjustments, just for the sake of time. So I rotated them down clockwise, and then I also moved them down just a hair, and I moved them back a little bit, just because I saw that they were not in perfect position. They were clipping a little bit, not visibly in the game, but in Blender you could tell that they were clipping a little bit. So I moved them back so they should look cleaner. And so now what you see is when I check again, the adjustments on the eyes have helped, and these extra edits we've been making, but the right eye looks just fine, but the left eye seems to be rotated like it's a little off kilter, so it's not on the exact same page as the right eye. And so now I'm going to zero in on that left eye, so it needs to be rotated down more, and try and level it up with the right eye. And once we get those to match the direction the eye's looking in, then we'll be good. Now I'm going to go ahead and check and see how it looks in game after making the adjustments to or in a second, after making adjustments to the left eye on its own. And I'm just kind of going back the history, the undo and redo, by pressing undo and redo, just to see what changes I made. Kind of go back over and get an idea of the changes I've already made and tweak it a little bit more. And now in the game you can see that the eyes are now looking in the same direction. And they may not be perfect. They may not be perfect by some standards, but they're at least to the point now. I at least wanted to show you how I fix that issue, and you can take that to further degree if you want to. So I would probably make a couple more tweaks and make them look a little cleaner, but it looks quite a bit better than it when he was looking into the top of his eyelids and the eyes were uneven. And so now the final focus is on those areas where clipping is happening, on his like back, shoulder blades, and his upper arms. And so again, I'm utilizing these extra vertex groups, some of these extra vertex groups from the skeleton, to using those in edit mode to make selections and then make more precise changes. And you can do this in sculpt mode. It doesn't have to be in edit mode, but I a lot of the time like to make these changes especially if I'm trying to avoid clipping. I like to do it in edit mode because it's more precise. Like, I can make sure it's moving along an axis, and I can just go incrementally as opposed to like just making the change according to where I'm dragging my mouse with the when I'm sculpting. Um, so I have thinned out his back shoulder blade. Excuse me. I have thinned out his back slash shoulder blade area, um, and move that in closer. And now what I'm going to do is thin out the torso area a little bit. And this is more just to be safe. Um, just to make sure there's no clipping in the upper body there. And so lastly, the arms is what I'm going to focus on, and the vertex groups that say arm underscore twist can be really helpful in making these selections, because they basically like have the upper arm and forearm, because there's forearm twist too. They have it broken up into these little these little selections. It's where you can gradually go up the arm as far as you want, or down the arm, so that here I can select from like the edge of the shoulder um, down to the forearm, but not all the way down to like the wrist area and the hands, because that can get messed up. Um, and so by doing this, um, it's a more precise way than sculpting it, because I know what area is selected, and I know the fall off, and I know exactly how much how much the scale is changing. I'll be shrinking it a little bit. And I also will turn the um, what's it called? So yeah, I have that set to view, and then when I'm moving or scaling, I click the whatever I'm whatever axis. If I'm going to like the x-axis, I will press X an additional time to where it says view. So when you're resizing, you'll see view in the little where it says on the like in the bottom left bar, where you see the values changing as you drag it back and forth. And now this is more of just an edit that is just more of for his look, as opposed uh, to avoid clipping. Um, I just gave his shoulders a little bit of a boost, or not a boost. I enlarged the shoulders a little bit and brought a little bit more definition in the shoulders, because some of that area got shrunk, and I didn't want that to look too small. But here's the player finished. He is now in a state where he is no longer clipping, and he is adapted into 2K18. And for all intents and purposes, he's game ready.